She was called the smartest dumb blonde in Hollywood, a woman who could quote Shakespeare, play the violin, and outsmart the studio executives who sold her as a fantasy. Jayne Mansfield wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous, because she knew exactly how to use that beauty. In the 1,950 seconds, when America wanted its women sweet and silent, Jayne was loud, daring, and unapologetically wild. She wore pink before Barbie. She lived like champagne sparkling, excessive, impossible to contain. And she wasn't content being a copy of Marilyn Monroe. She wanted to outshine her. But fame has rules, and Jayne broke every single one of them. Behind the laughter and the curves was a restless woman, a genius trapped in a blonde bombshell's body. She spoke 5 languages, studied law, and once said, "It's not enough to have a pretty face, you must have a mind behind it." Hollywood didn't like that kind of woman. They wanted her to be sexy, not smart. And when she refused to play by their script, they turned her into a punchline. By 34, she had everything: movies, fame, parties, men, money, and then, in one terrifying instant, it was all gone. June 29th, 1967. A midnight highway. A fatal crash that would change Hollywood forever. The legend said she was decapitated. The truth was even stranger. She lived fast, loved recklessly, and died in a way that no one could forget. But the mystery behind her final night and the rumors that followed still make people whisper, because Jayne Mansfield wasn't just another Hollywood blonde. She was a storm disguised as a star. Before she became Jayne Mansfield, she was Vera Jane Palmer, a bright, ambitious girl from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, born in 1933. She wasn't born into glamour. She was born into a quiet middle-class home, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a lawyer. But even as a child, Jayne wanted more than quiet. When she was only 3, her father died suddenly of a heart attack. Her mother, desperate to keep them afloat, moved to Dallas, Texas, where Jayne's larger-than-life personality began to bloom. At 12, she was already telling classmates she'd be a movie star. Not wanted to be would be. She was brilliant, and people underestimated her from the beginning. She played the violin, the piano, and spoke 5 languages, including Latin. She read Shakespeare for fun and could recite entire sonnets from memory. But when she looked in the mirror, she also saw something else, the kind of beauty that could bend the world to her will. By the time she entered high school, Jayne was already mixing intellect with showmanship. She wore pink when everyone else wore gray. She laughed louder, walked slower, and smiled like she already belonged in front of a camera. She married Paul Mansfield, her high school sweetheart, at just 17, and soon after gave birth to her first daughter, Jane Marie. But she wasn't built for domestic life. Texas was too small for her. Hollywood was calling. In 1954, she packed her bags, her baby, and her dreams and drove to California. She arrived with no money, no connections, and no plan except one: make the world notice her. And she did. She began modeling, taking minor film roles, and studying acting at UCLA, where her professors dismissed her as too voluptuous for Shakespeare. So she used what they couldn't ignore: her body. And soon, Hollywood did notice, first with raised eyebrows, then with open arms. By 1955, Jayne was on magazine covers across the country. She was funny, flirtatious, and unashamed of her sexuality in a world that punished women for it. She posed for Playboy, sparking outrage and fame. She played the dumb blonde in comedies, but she was in on the joke. In interviews, she turned every question back on the reporters, twisting their expectations into entertainment. When they asked her what it felt like to be compared to Marilyn Monroe, she smiled sweetly and said, "I think every woman should be a blonde at least once in her life." Behind the giggles, she was calculating. Every headline, every scandal, every pink outfit was a chess move. She created a brand before Hollywood even had the word for it. By 1956, she was one of the most photographed women in the world, rivaling Monroe herself. Her pink mansion in Los Angeles, nicknamed the Pink Palace, became a shrine to her personality: pink walls, pink carpets, a heart-shaped pool. She had everything she ever wanted: fame, fortune, and the illusion of control. But Jayne Mansfield didn't understand one thing in Hollywood: women who burn too brightly don't get to burn for long. Behind the glitter, cracks were beginning to form, and the road ahead, quite literally, would be her undoing. By the mid-1950 seconds, Jayne Mansfield was everywhere: magazine covers, movie screens, gossip columns, and late-night talk shows. She was the blonde bombshell America couldn't ignore, a living cartoon of curves and charm who made even Marilyn Monroe nervous. But unlike Monroe, Jayne was in on the joke. She played her image like an instrument, exaggerated, self-aware, and utterly fearless. Her big break came with The Girl Can't Help It 1956, a rock and roll comedy that turned her into a phenomenon overnight. She walked through the film like a flame, melting every man in sight, and the public couldn't get enough. She followed it with Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter 1957, where she practically mocked her own persona, the sex symbol who knew she was being sold like a product. It was both funny and tragic, because Jayne understood better than anyone that she was playing a role she could never escape. Off-screen, her life became even louder than her films. Her pink mansion, the Pink Palace, was open to photographers 24/7. She threw wild parties, posed with her pet chihuahuas, and filled her front yard fountain with pink champagne. Reporters called her Hollywood's Pink Hurricane. The crash was instant, and so was the myth. Within hours of Jayne Mansfield's death, tabloids across America screamed, "Hollywood's blonde goddess beheaded." The gruesome rumor spread faster than the truth, feeding an industry addicted to tragedy. In reality, she wasn't decapitated, though the impact was catastrophic. A fragment of her blonde wig was found tangled in the metal wreckage, and by morning, that detail had turned into the most sensational lie of her career. Even in death, Jayne was being rewritten by the press that once adored her. But what truly haunted people wasn't the crash itself, it was the curse. Just months before her death, Jayne had begun appearing with Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. Photographs of the two, she, smiling in a black gown, he, pale and ominous, circulated like wildfire. They looked like a match made in hell, and they loved the attention. But soon after, Jayne's boyfriend, Sam Brody, began taunting LaVey in the press. LaVey warned him, "You will die in a car crash." When Jayne's Buick was torn apart on Highway 90, with Brody behind the wheel, the legend wrote itself. People swore LaVey's curse had come true. Others whispered that Jayne had been dabbling in the occult, chasing fame beyond the mortal kind. Whether superstition or coincidence, the story added a shadow to her already glittering name. And then there were her children. 3 little ones, asleep in the back seat that night, survived without a scratch. Among them was Mariska Hargitay, who would grow up to become one of television's most respected actresses and carry the scar, literal and emotional, from the crash that took her mother. But even before the accident, Jayne had been spiraling. Her finances were in ruins. Her career was fading. The roles had stopped coming, and the clubs were paying less and less. The same studios that once begged for her attention now called her a relic. In the months before her death, she seemed haunted, telling friends she felt cursed and used up. She confided to a reporter, "They only want me when I'm smiling. They never cared who I really am." Hollywood had turned her into a fantasy, and fantasies aren't supposed to grow old. After her death, the Pink Palace became a shrine, then a ruin. Fans broke into her empty mansion to steal pieces of her legend, a mirror, a pillow, even strands of hair. The city finally demolished it in 2002. All that remained was the heart-shaped pool, cracked and faded, a symbol of how fragile even the brightest dreams can be. For decades, conspiracy theories swirled. Was the crash just bad luck? Was it sabotage? Was it a curse? No one could say. But maybe it didn't matter. Because Jayne Mansfield's life had always been larger than logic, a mixture of beauty, chaos, and tragedy that defied explanation. She lived like she was chasing lightning, and when it struck, she was already too bright to survive it. From this channel's point of view, Jayne Mansfield wasn't just a Hollywood bombshell, she was a prophecy. A warning wrapped in sequins and pink satin. She represented everything the golden age of Hollywood wanted, from its women beauty, sex, charm, and a touch of chaos. But she also exposed how fake it all was. Unlike Marilyn Monroe, who radiated vulnerability, Jayne radiated control. She wasn't just playing the blonde fantasy, she was engineering it. She turned her body, her laugh, her image into a weapon, one she used against a world that only respected men for their intelligence. She once said, "If you're smart and beautiful, people only remember one of those things." Jayne knew which one the public would choose. So she played along, but that was her tragedy. She built her career on a mask so dazzling that no one ever looked beneath it. Hollywood adored the caricature, but never cared for the woman inside. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't reckless. She was a woman who understood that fame is both a gift and a curse, and she rode it like a wave she knew would drown her. The pink mansion, the champagne fountains, the scandals, it was all performance art decades before the world had a word for it. In many ways, Jayne Mansfield was the first modern celebrity, unapologetic, self-created, and fully aware that the public wanted to watch her rise just so they could savor her fall. And fall she did not because she failed, but because Hollywood couldn't stand a woman who laughed at its rules. Her story echoes through the decades. Every influencer who crafts an image online, every pop star who turns scandal into strategy, they're walking the same tightrope Jayne did first. She was the blueprint. She showed the world that fame without control is addiction, that attention is not affection, and that the brighter you burn, the shorter you get to live in the light. Even her death, gruesome, sensationalized, endlessly dissected, became part of her legend. The curse, the wig, the rumors, it was all the same machine chewing up a woman one last time. But if you strip away the tabloid headlines, what's left is a story of a woman who refused to be small. Jayne Mansfield wasn't a victim of vanity. She was a victim of a system that demanded women be both worshipped and destroyed. Her pink world has faded now, her mansion gone, her laughter silent. But her legacy lives on, in every woman who turns the spotlight back on itself and says, "You don't own me." Jayne Mansfield was not the dumb blonde. She was the mirror, and Hollywood just didn't like what it saw staring back. But beneath the glitter, her marriage to Paul Mansfield was collapsing. He couldn't compete with her fame or her hunger for more. They divorced in 1958, and within a year Jayne married Mickey Hargitay, a Hungarian bodybuilder and former Mr. Universe who worshipped her. Their love was passionate, public, and chaotic, full of magazine spreads, muscle poses, and babies. But behind closed doors, their arguments were as explosive as their chemistry. Hollywood, once fascinated by her, began to tire of the spectacle. Directors whispered that she was too much, too loud, too sexual, too scandalous for the changing times. She wasn't just competing with Monroe anymore. She was fighting the new wave of cinema that demanded realism over fantasy. Desperate to stay relevant, Jayne began accepting anything that would keep her name in print stage shows in Las Vegas, European films, nightclub acts. She performed for money, not passion, but she never lost her sparkle. Even when critics mocked her, she'd laugh and say, "You can't be a legend without a little scandal." Then came Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. In 1966, rumors spread that Jayne had attended his rituals, even becoming his high priestess of love. Photographs of them together, she in black lace, he in his cape, shocked the public. Some called it publicity, others whispered of a curse. A few months later, tragedy would make that whisper sound like prophecy. On the 28th of June 1967, Jayne was in Biloxi, Mississippi, finishing a nightclub performance with her boyfriend, Sam Brody, and 3 of her children, including her 3-year-old daughter, Mariska Hargitay. They drove through the night in her white Buick Electra, racing toward New Orleans for another show. Sometime after 2:30 a.m., the car slammed into the back of a tractor-trailer hidden by a thick cloud of insect fog on Highway 90. The top of the car sheared off instantly. Everyone in the front seat, Jayne, Brody, and the driver, died on impact. The legend spread like wildfire. Jayne Mansfield was decapitated. It wasn't true, but the image was too shocking to kill. Her pink dream had ended in twisted metal and shattered glass. Hollywood mourned her for a week, then moved on. But the world never forgot. Because Jayne Mansfield wasn't just another pretty face. She was the woman who turned fame into a performance and paid the ultimate price for it. In the end, they remembered the pink, the laughter, the camera flashes, the way Jayne Mansfield could walk into a room and make everyone forget what they were saying. But behind all the glitter, there was always something fragile, a flicker of sadness hidden beneath the blonde curls and champagne smile. She once said, "You can't always keep the sparkle. Sometimes it burns." She wasn't wrong. Jayne lived like lightning, dazzling, unpredictable, impossible to hold. She built her life out of color and chaos, daring the world to keep up. And for a while it did. But fame is never kind to those who shine too much. The crash took her body. But the world kept her image frozen forever in pink, smiling for a camera that never stopped rolling. Even now, decades later, her legend refuses to fade. Because Jayne wasn't just a Hollywood star. She was the moment Hollywood became self-aware, the first to understand that fame was performance, that beauty was business, and that the line between the two was deadly thin. Her daughter, Mariska Hargitay, once said, "Losing my mother was the defining sadness of my life, but her strength lives in me." And maybe that's Jayne's real legacy, not the scandal, not the superstition, but the spark she left behind in every woman who refused to be defined by the way she looked. When we remember her, We remember the sound of laughter echoing through a pink mansion, the shimmer of a star who wouldn't apologize for wanting everything. She was too smart for her time, too bold for her era, too bright for her own survival. The world tried to contain her. The crash just made her immortal. Some stories fade. Some vanish into rumor and myth. But Jayne Mansfield's story still glows part tragedy, part warning, part defiance. Because she wasn't destroyed by fame. She became its ghost. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know.